And his first play, because he wants to conquer Middle Earth, is actually to play nice. So he puts on this disguise, Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he goes out and he tries to befriend the elves, and mix and mingle with them. And for those who watch the terrible show Rings of Power, it tells kind of that story where he finds one Celebrimbor in Erodor, and he tries to get, to work with Celebrimbor to make Rings of Power. I don't know. Should we go into the rings now?
Yeah, I think maybe just before we do, because we know that it's around this time, just coincidentally, that the men of Numenor start, losing their faith to the Valar.
Yes. So here,
I
let
think
me.
it's setting the context for what's to come.
So I'm not going to go through the history of Númenor, but for lack of better words, there's two different types of people that start to emerge in Númenor after a lengthy part of its history. One group remains faithful to their gift, faithful to the Valar, who had gifted them everything, and they understand that they need to live their extended life, but die with grace. So this can be seen with how they pick how their ruler comes about. So the ruler of Númenor is supposed to give up his title to probably his son after he is too old and he doesn't have all of his faculties. So you can think of like President Biden, for example. Before you become too demented, you give up the title, and
Or
most
at
of the
least not
Númenor
like,
kings do.
at least not like, typical kings where you are on the throne till you literally die or
Yeah.
get killed.
Exactly. So in the early part of Númenor's history, most of the kings, they get old and they hand it over when the time comes, and they embrace death with grace. Eventually, there starts to be a turn. Gradually, some kings become a little resentful of things. They're resentful first of the elves, who have, immortality as far as they can see. They're a little resentful of the Undying Lands, where they're not allowed to go to, and they don't understand why that they have to have a mortal life. Even though they live like 150 or 200 years old or something, they start to resent this. And then some of these kings start getting corrupted by that resentment, and they don't give up their scepter at the right time, and it starts to get bad. And then two groups are basically formed. The first group was the one I mentioned, those who were faithful. They're called the faithful. The other group go under the nomener of the Kingsmen. And I mean, I'm jumping into the history a bit. They eventually become so corrupted by this fear of death that they want to rebel against the Valar.
This is going to be like the future foundation for Sauron after an event which we'll talk about. But the king who started this was the 13th king of Númenor, named Tar Adenamir. I'm sorry if I butchered the name.
The names are hard, yeah.
Or Adenamir the Great. He is the first king that openly, questions the ban of the Valar, as it's called. And this is where you start to see the sundering between the men of Númenor, where you have the Edain, the faithful, and then you'll have the Kingsmen, as you rightly called.
Yeah. It also has to do with the language. The Númenóreans speak, the languages of the elves and stuff, but they also come up with this other Andaic, I think it's pronounced, language. And the Kingsmen eventually favor using this language and calling themselves their names in that language. So the future kings who are Kingsmen, who drift further and further away from the Valar, they start naming themselves like Ar-Pharazôn and such, this other language and stuff. So yeah, there's this great divide. It's kind of like a civil war that never really sees a war.
Call it like a political. You can call it like a political shadow war.
Yeah. Horrible stuff happens. We'll get into it later.